Hi, I'm Dr. Thomas Armstrong, and I'm making a series of short videos to introduce my new book, The Power of Neurodiversity, Unleashing the Advantages of Your Neurodivergent Brain. This is a completely revised and updated second edition of a book that I originally wrote in 2010. The title of this video is The Strengths, Assets, and Advantages of Dyslexics. In my book, The Power of Neurodiversity, I use a concept called positive niche construction, which is essentially creating a favorable environment within which our strengths can manifest, where we can maximize our abilities and minimize our difficulties. It's what birds do when they build nests, when spiders spin webs, when bees build hives. And I've identified 8 components of positive niche construction. I'm not going to go through them all now. An earlier video does that, and you can also read about the whole model in my book. But I want to focus on one particular component and look at it at its relevance to dyslexia. Actually, I'm going to look at the most important component, the first on the list, which I call strength awareness. And this is that we should do as much as we can to let the person that we're working with or teaching, or even for ourselves, learn as much as we can about our strengths, talents, and abilities. For many neurodivergent people, they've taken tests their whole school life that has pointed out what they can't do. And I think they need to reverse this process or balance it out and investigate what they can do, their many gifts and abilities. So in this presentation, I'm going to go through some of the strengths that are associated with dyslexia and other learning disabilities. The first strength is mechanical aptitude. You see this in many individuals who have dyslexia. I remember, and maybe you do too, taking tests in elementary school that had items like this one. If you see X turning in this direction, then what direction is wheel W going to move in the direction of A or B? And I always blew these tests. I did very well on the vocabulary and the math, but these kind of tests just blew me out of the water. And I guess it was my moment of realization that we all learn differently. But this is something that you might see in individuals with dyslexia, a propensity to like to work with mechanical objects. Perhaps we're looking at our future mechanic or machinist, somebody that can take things apart and put them back together again. Another strength of dyslexia is that they're often strong in drawing. This is Howard Gardner's model for multiple intelligences, the 8 intelligences. And as you see, there's body smart, people smart, word smart, logic smart, nature smart, self smart, picture smart, and music smart. Well, here we're talking about picture smart, or what Gardner calls visual-spatial intelligence. I did my doctoral research on Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences. I looked at the strengths of kids labeled learning disabled using Gardner's model. And I kept documents, and this is document 6B from page 293 of my doctoral dissertation. And a boy, about a first, second grade boy, told his mother that this was a kid that has butter in the tube. He pours peanuts in his brain and they go squirting out his ears. And he mixes it with the butter in the tube he has to make peanut butter. And then he goes from door to door on his skateboard selling it. and you can see the dollar sign on his skull cap, and you can see the dollar bill or $100 bill or whatever in his hand. So here you have a kid who's put together a lot of ideas in a relatively brief space and interval of time. And I think that this is definitely a very creative drawing. And yet this child was labeled learning disabled, very possibly dyslexic. People who have dyslexia are oftentimes best suited in jobs that involve graphic design, architecture, illustration, animation, etc. Many of these dyslexic thinkers are 3D thinkers. They do better at this test, the impossible figures test, where you have to look at the object and tell as quickly as possible whether or not you could make that object in reality. And people who were dyslexic were able to do it quicker without any sacrifice of accuracy compared to neurotypicals. And in fact, in case you're wondering whether this object can be built, it can't. Architecture requires this kind of ability to look at objects from different points of view. Genetics requires this because the double helix model is a three-dimensional model, and you've got to be able to look at it from almost an infinite number of directions to be able to understand its interrelations and how that affects human behavior. Here's a designer of, it looks like they're building a commode, perhaps a soft drink machine. I don't know exactly, but you notice the turning around, the shifting, the different points of view. You also see this in Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks. I just finished a couple of books about his life and was amazed to discover that he was not good at math, which I thought he was, that he was good at drawing. I think we can all agree with that, and with painting, of course. But you see here, he's actually, the story behind this is he's dissected. He dissected about 30 people in his lifetime, and this particular dissection was of a man who claimed to be 100 years old. And you hear at the top, you see him on his deathbed. At any rate, you notice he shows the muscles from different points of view, and the insides as well. So he's definitely a 3D thinker. Whether or not he was dyslexic is an open question. He did write backwards. He wrote Italian backwards. You can probably see it if you look at his notes here. But the nearest suggestion is that he did it so that he wouldn't smudge his hand because he was left-handed. I don't know if I buy that. I'm left-handed and I don't do that. It's another thing suggesting that directionality was not a big thing for him. You know, right, left, that kind of thing. Another strength you see with respect to dyslexia is entrepreneurial proclivities. They like creating their own businesses. They like the challenge of coming up with an idea that nobody else has thought of and of working with people to bring that idea into fruition. In one study that was done at the City University in London at the Cass Business School, a third of small businessmen in America reported being dyslexic, compared to 2% of middle managers in large corporations. You see this also in some of the giants in the world of business. Richard Branson, Charles Schwab, Paul Orphalet, who created Kinko's, Ted Turner, who created CNN. They all have reported having either dyslexia or ADHD or a combination. And they say the same kinds of things. They manage by wandering around. They don't like getting bogged down in details. They get people to help them for stuff like that while they concentrate on the big picture. People with dyslexia also have holistic perception. They can look at something that's blurred, and in the rectangle that's labeled B, they're supposed to look for that same shape in that blurred configuration. And they can be trained to do this and do it more quickly and accurately than neurotypicals. And this is a decided advantage in several fields. For example, a radiologist needs that ability to see meaningful things in an X-ray or an MRI. A microbiologist needs to have this kind of capacity when looking at cells and cell division and other forms of microbes and bacteria and so on. A cosmologist needs to have this ability when they're looking at masses of galaxies and finding little seemingly irrelevant things that are actually quite fundamental to new discoveries in astronomy. And finally, I'd used this term earlier, big picture thinking. People with autism, those of you who heard my video on the strengths of autism, will remember that I pointed out that people with autism are small detail people. They can really work well finding little things. I call them Where's Waldo people because they could pick out Waldo in a huge configuration of images. Well, people with dyslexia are different, almost the reverse in that respect. They can see whole pictures at the same time, conceptually and perceptually. So for my doctoral dissertation on learning disabilities and Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences, one of the documents I included was a middle school student who did this image of a car seen from a bird's eye view. And maybe that's another way of saying it. People with dyslexia are good at having bird's eye views of things. Here's another diagram from Leonardo da Vinci's work where he has taken an entire city, or a small village actually, and he's, I don't know how he got up there, but in his mind he did. And he has that three-dimensional bird's eye view of things that was enabled him to create this aerial view map. And so that was the cartographer in him. So that's a few things about the strengths of people with dyslexia. There are many other aspects that I haven't even explored, but I wanted to give you just a sense of it so that you could begin to, if you haven't already, begin to appreciate the things that are going right with an individual with dyslexia. We, especially in the schools, live in such a world where word smart and number and logic smart, using Gardner's model, seem to rule over everything. So the person who's picture smart rarely has a chance to show their stuff in a traditional classroom environment. If they're lucky, when they got out of school, they'll find jobs as architects, as cartographers, as animators, and so forth. But we need to acknowledge that gift while kids are young. And we also need to find that gift in an individual who may not be doing well in adulthood, maybe drifting from job to job, because they haven't realized that they have a gift in this area, and they get all focused on their dyslexia. Now, there are good ways of learning to read, and I've shared some of those in my book, but we also need to give people who are neurodivergent opportunities to achieve in their areas of strength. So I discuss this in more detail in my book. I hope you get The Power of Neurodiversity and share it with your teachers if it's about a child that you're working with, or maybe it's for yourself, or maybe give it to your employer who can understand how you think. And in any case, I hope that you will get the book and enjoy it and share it with others. You can sign up for my blog posts by going to my website, which is www.institute4learning.com. That's institute4learning.com. And put your email address in, and you will automatically receive a 200-item neurodiversity strengths checklist, which is also from the book. Thanks again for listening, for watching, and I hope that the information is useful to you and that you will share the ideas of neurodiversity, the positive human potential aspects of this model, so that we can help everyone realize their full potential. Thanks so much for listening. Bye.